Hello and welcome to This Week at the Movies. I'm Matt.
And I'm Eric.
And this week we are diving into November and also into Oscar season. November starting out with a very female-centric focus on stories. We had a lot of stories about and starring women this weekend. And of course, next weekend we will have the big Marvel blockbuster, The Marvels, which has 3 female superheroes front and center. So a couple of fun weeks to kick off the month. Well, a couple of female-centric weeks to kick off the month. I hope next week's movie is fun, because fun is not the word I would use to describe tonight's main focus film, which is the new biopic, Priscilla, which is based on the book from Priscilla Presley about her relationship with Elvis, called Elvis and Me, that was adapted for the screen and directed by Sofia Coppola. In this one, we get, Elvis has been the focus of a couple of very big projects in consecutive years. Last year during the summer, we had Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, starring Austin Butler, which earned a Best Picture nomination, earned a Best Actor nomination. Was really a focus on his career and his music. They had almost all of his canon of songs in there. This one, released here, the wide release first weekend in November, puts the focus on the relationship between Priscilla Presley and Elvis, something we didn't see a whole lot of, despite being what was a nearly 3-hour biopic film last year. This one has a decidedly different tone. We pick up in Germany in 1959. We're introduced to a 14-year-old Priscilla, played by Kaylee Spaney, who is who is living on a military base with her family. Her father had been assigned there in Germany, and this is during the time when a then 24-year-old Elvis Presley was in the army. She gets invited over to his house, a connection sparks, and we watch a relationship that in the film I think spans 12 or 13 years. I think we're supposed to have ended right around 1972, 73. So we get a pretty big slice of life. It has a decidedly different feel, a decidedly different tone, and a decidedly different portrait of the iconic singer. Eric, what did this movie do for you?
Made me sleepy. As if you're laying in a house with all of the lighting of the house off and just letting sunlight in through the windows, and you're taking a nap, but every once in a while somebody starts screaming in the other room and you're like, what was that about? And they don't explain it to you, and then you just leave.
And there was a lot of quick cuts and odd jumps and intercuts along the timeline here.
A lot of fade to blacks.
Especially as we got at the end of the film. I was never quite sure where it was going to end or what we were going to achieve. I was looking at my watch and I'm like, we've got to be pretty close based on the runtime, but I don't feel like we're coming in for any more of a landing than I felt like 20 minutes prior.
And that kind of leaves me feeling like I'm doing work for the movie, trying to piece together what it was trying to be or say, other than just like a series of connected images. There's this idea of the way that it's pitched, that you're going to watch a coming of age romance combined with one of those like behind the scenes, it wasn't the story you thought it was. And so we've already had the biopic or whatever, we've seen Elvis. Now we're going to watch Priscilla. And it's a very interesting idea to me, like even just after coming off of all the buzz of Elvis the movie, starting this, I got invested really quickly into thinking, like, okay, now where did this take place in the span of his life as I know it from that other movie? And, it's like right when he loses his mother, right when he goes overseas to join the military, that this is where that's picking up on. And I love the idea of two different people living and feeling like they live in two different worlds. And I think in a weird way, these two movies complement each other, even though they have nothing to do with each other. Because if you were to watch Elvis and then this, and like stop, pause the movie Elvis and start watching this part, and then like switch back and forth in tone at points that feel like it makes sense, I feel like you would have a complete movie that shows more of what it feels like they were trying to earn with this. Because uh without really spoiling it, the ending to me fell really, really flat in terms of
It's
like
kind of hard
I
to spoil something that, I mean, everybody's probably Wikipedia the crap out of their lives, especially after what happened last
right,
year.
but specifically the choice, like, they don't even show her children are with her.
I think
You
she
know,
just said the one.
I know, but I mean,
Yeah.
it, we make a point that it's like, look at just her and look how several years just happened in a span of 15 minutes on screen, and then she makes this climactic decision in a very quiet moment in home, and then you sort of know, even though it's not like true, but like what this represents is like her last time letting go and driving away from something. And I'm like, who was this person as a mother? Who was this person? Like, is it that she didn't know who she was? And when she started to realize who she was in LA, she realized she wasn't living her life for herself? If so, why didn't we get to spend any more than like 15 minutes on her deciding she wanted this other life for herself? There's a hint earlier on. I mean, I guess we should basically cover what the structure of the movie is that there's this very tight and very entertaining, smooth kind of falling in love story that happens that has a lot of uncomfortable feelings to the idea that she's 14 and how are they going to play this. And I think you mentioned what about her parents?
Yeah. They spend a little bit of time about, my parents are never going to let me do this, nor should they. Parents in
Yeah,
2023 wouldn't let you do this. To think that in 1959 they let her essentially as a I was trying to track along with the time. I think when she first flies to America to visit him, she's 16, and when they relent to letting her come live with him, she's 17 and still
yeah.
in high school. I I'll be honest, there's a huge swath of um this story, and when you really stop and think about it, that made me a little more critical of last year's Elvis biopic, which completely glossed over the meet cute and the relationship here. Priscilla Presley is not much of a factor in that movie, Elvis, and probably because he decided if we were going to make some kind of celebration of this guy's artistic uh where I don't want to spend time thinking about the fact that he kept a child prisoner for like
Yeah,
8
basically.
years before, in the I didn't know that much. I guess I have not spent that much time looking at their timeline of their relationship, but in last year's Elvis biopic, it certainly feels like they kind of meet and they courted for a few months and they got married. Absolutely not the case. They kind of meet when she's 14
Yeah.
and correspond for a few years remotely. Then he
Not
just
even.
keeps
It's like
her
she tries to correspond. He leaves her in the dark.
and
It
then he
starts
keeps her
immediately.
like a doll in his house for 5 years and
Yeah,
then
and
ends
he
up getting.
explicitly tells her, like, "You can't have a career and me," when she asks about getting a job to keep busy.
Yeah.
And it's odd. There's like this huge level of passion that she has for him, and I think it's appropriate that his side of the story she's glossed over or barely acknowledged.
Yeah,
Because
because she wasn't that big of a factor in his life.
yeah, it's
Well, and if
it
you
kind
read
of
more kind of about it too, it's almost like he didn't want to get married at all, but that was just a deal he had made, and then it started to look bad when people realized he'd been keeping this girl in his house for
mm.
for a long
Yeah,
time.
I mean, there was a little shot, a dose of 2016, to me for this movie, which to me was the year that like so many things came out about it, so many horrific, nasty secrets of backstories, and they like we kicked off like movements and all of this kind of stuff came out, and it's like you got to be really careful how and who you idolize and why and what categories and whatnot, and we started to realize that movie stars aren't really as much of a thing, and celebrities, like there's always been sort of tabloid journalism around celebrities and whatnot, but then there's this idea of we put some people up on a pedestal and like glorify them, and that is going to do dangerous things to a person, and they're not going to be perfect people. And then here you've got this underbelly of like I feel like Elvis' life was probably turning like horrible, and then that just bled all into this. He needs everything at home to be in place and waiting for him, so he has everything stable, and he that extended onto people. Like he doesn't realize, I think, that he's treating Priscilla as much of an object, and he did with animals too. Like there's got to be like a dog involved, and there's got to be like different things. It just he's like, I got to go live my big life, so everything needs to stay where I need it to be, and I need to be free to do whatever I want to do. And it's a level of narcissism and manipulation that is like creepy. And this movie does an effective job, I think, at getting the idea across of feeling trapped in that. But I think it also there's a conflict because she wants to be trapped in it. It's just she didn't want to stay, and then boom, she was free. So what are we
Well,
getting at with this?
and
I'm one thumb down on this, by the way. I liked a lot of it, but just in the end, what are we doing? What I don't feel like I'd be thinking this if I had. I don't know if this was a marriage of Sofia Coppola and that story and this vision not quite gelling, but it just like
yeah,
I
I'm
don't know.
thumbs neutral. There were things about it that I thought were well done, but it feels like you go through a long stretch where very little forward momentum happens, even in terms of having some kind of big revelation or where are we going, and then they compress down like the last 25 minutes. They almost, to borrow from Seinfeld, they yada yada her
Yeah,
moving
her
to
life,
LA.
like
And
her
like I
wedding,
was
her move
reading
to her
some
child, everything.
and I was reading some things about it was this time in LA was very formative for her. She started taking karate, fell in love with the karate instructor. I don't think I totally grasped that they were having an affair from that like 1/2 minute dinner scene that we get, and that she had realized that she had more fulfillment from life apart, and he had kind of really descended down, which we do remember from the actual Elvis biopic when they were talking about his Las Vegas residency. He kind of really started to spiral. I remember, so I read some of the press that came out that at least Marie Presley, before she died, had read the script, obviously not seen the finished film, and was very upset with the way her father was portrayed in the film, which I can kind of understand after seeing it. But
Yeah.
Priscilla Presley, it's based on her book. She's an executive producer here. By all accounts, this is the version of her own life that she wanted to tell. And maybe is this also somewhat of a counter to the way that last year's biopic was a big celebration of him that glossed over, like, clearly it had to have glossed over a lot of these
Well, we couldn't. That's the
fairly
thing. Like,
dark things.
yeah, the Elvis movie feels a lot more like it's trying to build him sympathetic and talk about his manager being the secret villain that brought a lot of tyranny into his life. And then every one of these movies about a musician, it seems to be also drugs. But
Yeah, and in the biopic, you get they can't cover that up because that was a big contributing factor in his death. But in this one, it sure seems like he started doing it a lot earlier.
I guess I think there's a different way I would explain my feelings to sum up would be nobody should ever be treated the way that Priscilla Presley was treated.
Yeah, 100%. That is a huge takeaway from this.
And then I also just feel like I want to know what she grew up to be now. It's this movie simultaneously defines her as nothing outside of this relationship.
And that is the
I don't
fascinating
know.
part because she built like her own business empire and has been very successful since she broke free. But you
Yeah.
don't need, I mean, there's not even a post credits roll. You know how you get in some biopics where they tell you the rest of the
Yeah.
story, even if this is the part that they want to focus on. This almost feels like it is really meant to be a counter to the flattering portrait we got last year. And it does serve as that because it would be almost impossible if you watch this to think about him in the same way. They never really even try to use his music in here. She uses a lot of different
Yeah.
kind of musical beats and cuts. This isn't about him as a performer or his stage persona. This is trying to lay bare who he actually was, which it definitely, when you look at the Elvis biopic, feels like that one went the complete other way and was looking at who he built himself to be for an audience. Maybe he was more at home there. I mean, I will say for me,
Yeah.
the one thing that I think I really liked was the lead performance from Callie Spaney, who plays Priscilla Presley. She has to start as a kind of innocent 14-year-old and morph through some very weird and difficult circumstances into, I mean, I guess in 73 she still would have been not even 30 years old, but definitely hardened by some tough life experiences. And
Yeah,
I thought
she's
that came
fantastic.
through very well.
I thought Jacob Elordi was pretty fantastic too as Elvis for what
Just
he
a
had to be.
creepy version of the.
Yeah.
But he does a good job with the weird, the accent, the cadence, and the look
Mhm.
kind of sinking into it. So they did a really good job there. And you know what was interesting, even though you get snippets of Elvis on the phone with Colonel Parker, you never really see him. It sort of
Right.
villainizes Elvis's father a little bit.
It does. But that's another kind of the odd thing about it. This movie, all right, coming of age story, but it's about someone who fell in love with Elvis of all people. So how do you relate to it? Um Trapped into like a housewife role in the 50s with an even older generation of domineering patriarch where this would be common for a lot of people and she's living a life of privilege. So without being let more into her head and the manipulations and the things that she's going through and whatnot, like we can still get that what she's going through is unfair and not okay, but like I think we're just so used to being fed stories where people who go through these types of manipulation and abuse like are hurt physically more, that the threat feels more immediate. Like there's some, I saw somebody talking about this earlier about how what we kind of get is an insight onto how Elvis kind of idolized a certain kind of Marlon Brando he mentions and James Dean and that kind of thing, but that's not who he sort of is, and maybe doesn't want to admit that, but she's allowed under his skin, and he ends up marrying her versus any other woman. And so it's sort of she's seeing the vulnerable human side of Elvis, but that's putting her in danger? Or is it just the
Yeah,
drug
and
that's putting her in danger?
what didn't come
What is
through strong enough for me, I think you needed more at the beginning that would have really cemented that romantic bond. And other than, unless you're saying she was somewhat starstruck, but even as a young girl, when she's arguing with her parents, she keeps saying, he trusts me, he gets me. I don't think we saw enough of that in the foundation, which makes it hard in the middle when you get to the really kind of, couple of scenes of physical violence, number of
Mm.
sequences where she suspects he's being unfaithful. And a lot of this happens before they're ever married. So it's not like she's staying in it for the marriage or
A
the daughter.
marriage or a child.
I
Yeah.
don't think they did enough to explain why she stayed.
Yeah, and we I think they started very well. I bought into watching the months on the calendar disappear while she's watching him live his life from the sidelines and missing him and yearning for him. Like I have never lived that experience, but I felt I completely understood and was behind her passion for that. It's sort of after like they start teasing that she's going to be taking the same substances as him, and that turns out to, as far as the movie goes, be nothing. And they start teasing that he's training her to have like a gun around her, and that turns out to just have been a thing that happened and not
Just a
really
quirk, I
anything.
guess.
Yeah, just a quirk. And like it's that part where they start to build up what their life is together, and you're not being let into how this is supposed to have made her feel, and it's not relatable enough to living a common life. It's like being introduced to Elvis life.
And maybe if you had read the full text of the biopic, or
Mhm.
the biography, you'd have some of these things filled in, but there wasn't enough filled in. You mostly know she's going to stay because historically, they have to
She
get to
stayed.
some point where they got married and had a child.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to me too, the few times you do see her in the Elvis biopic, she's on the road and traveling with
Mm.
Elvis, which this movie makes seem like was never allowed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's just an interesting thing to reconcile the performances. I think for me, for both, but I didn't actually love the Elvis biopic. There were some things about it I thought were well crafted, and I thought Austin Butler's performance was really good, but it didn't totally work for me. And I almost feel the same exactly about this. I think I gave them literally the same scores.
Mm.
The performances were good. There were some things about the style and creating the period that I thought, dropped you into this world, but there was just, in both cases, there's something missing from the story. And I almost like your idea that they needed to be fused together, because Elvis's, complete decline and destruction in the other biopic would have probably made a little more sense if you knew more about who he was as a person, and seeing him as a charismatic performer and how he could draw people in, which you never really get in this movie. There is no, and that is one thing that a lot of people felt about Elvis, which is why his music remains popular, and as a figure he continues to endure in popularity, because there was something charismatic and that drew you in. You don't really ever see that part of Elvis in
And
this
Priscilla.
biopic. Even in the early party scenes in Priscilla, he seems a little aloof. You get that one sequence where he's playing a
Playing the
song on the
piano.
piano, but
Yeah.
that, other than that, he seems kind of aloof and detached
Yeah, it makes
and
it look like
managed.
his
So
life is just I want to go shooting. Oh look, I found a bulldozer. I want to knock it down because that'd be a cool thing. All his male friends are all around him constantly, like they have no privacy. Like
yeah, which,
it's
and
odd.
so somewhere between reconciling the two projects, you probably get a more complete picture. I still don't know if it would be a
Yeah.
movie that I loved. I thought there were merits to both, but it just
I like Elvis. I like the one from last year, but I the thing is, I honestly, it's really hard because to me this movie is in a different camp. I give something like I think I gave Blue Beetle like a thumb up, right?
Mhm.
But that is a movie that is like aiming at a certain type of entertainment, whereas this is a sort of aimed at adults human drama, and it's something that we don't get a lot of, and something that I think we do need more of. And I I like this, but I can't sit and watch a movie that's supposed to be all about the sort of oppressed feminine woman voice in a story that is so much about being defined by the man. Like it's like she lived in his cage, but the movie just seems a little too fascinated by his cage and not as much about the person inside of it after a little while. And I can't, there's something to me, but like I have to think, if I lived in a world that was populated with movies like this, would this be a good movie out of out of human drama movies? And that's where I have to say it's like a thumbs down, because it's just it just something feels wrong. And at first it's supposed to feel wrong. She's a 14-year-old in a relationship with a 24-year-old superstar, and they keep having the same beat where it's like, but my dad will say no, let me talk to him. And then there's like a brief scene, and then
Yeah,
she keeps
he's
getting
like a
drawn
hardened
in.
military officer that, oh, he seems like a charming guy. I mean, this will be fine.
Oh
This
yeah,
is
he'll
fine.
enroll her in a Catholic school as long as she
Kind of reminds you of
graduates.
the
He can
meme
live with
where the
her.
dog's sitting there and the house is on fire. It's like, this is fine. That's all
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. And,
Well, and
but then
after he kind of takes her
yeah.
and has a tearful, like dropping her off there where she's going to go live, I think you don't even really there's not enough at the wedding for
No,
it to even be seen. Like the parents don't reappear, and
it's like, who is she as a person after
that's probably the biggest disservice
45 minutes into the movie?
that
I
it
don't know.
does, because she's had a life and a career and built a lot of things
Yeah.
on her own. Like if you read a little bit about the biopic, her big thing after leaving Elvis was wanting to prove that she wasn't just a figure in his shadow, that she could stand on her own, and built a business and did some of those things. And that was what's weird to me, the way I guess you're just supposed to believe that that's going to happen when they play the sad song and she drives out the gate the last time.
I don't know. The last time I was let in that hard to what her emotions were, it was that my belief based on the movie that I saw, based on not knowing the real person and not having read her book, I believe that she continued to have a relationship with Elvis because they have a child together. And that wasn't the last time she returned there. And she never totally escaped. And she both loved it and hated it. And that was in perpetuity forever. And yet the movie tried to make it seem like she was like free from something. So I'm like, you didn't end your movie, Miss Coppola. You didn't end your movie. Like, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, there is 100% chance of more action sequences for our movie next week, which is the Marvels.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's 100% chance of more laughs, because I didn't have any
Yeah.
laughs with this sobering late night Saturday. This was not the warm hug I needed after going to a football game where the team I was going to watch lost 23-3. But hopefully we will get some good things with the Marvels. Later in this month, we have another installment of the Hunger Games coming out, Napoleon, which should be a lighthearted story coming to theaters just in time for Thanksgiving. Because what I think of when I think of warm family holidays is a dictator trying to conquer the world.
And the inspirational, action-packed story of how he did so. I have my gripes about the way this movie's being promoted.
Yes. It's the feel-good dictator story of the year. And then, Eric, I haven't talked about yet, but there are a couple of classic Christmas films that turn 20 years old that are being re-released in theaters this year that might be worth touching on at the beginning of December.
Cool.
So hopefully we will have some lighthearted things coming. So Priscilla, of all the movies out there, this is one of them that you can go check out. Maybe watch the Elvis biopic at home on HBO Max and then roll into this and just add to the confusion that Eric and I felt. So
Yeah, I think it would serve people better to kind of mesh them a little bit. But yeah,
well, that'll do it for this week. Until next week, we'll see you at the movies.